1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh, hello.
Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You are listening to Masters of Rock Talk, and we guarantee a pleasant ride, less than 30 minutes, and you'll learn probably what you need to know. My name is Dr. Ian Clarke, and I'm joined today by...
Kennedy.
That's good enough. You always want one name, you know. The police have trouble with that, but, you know, it's simply Kennedy, like Madonna, one of those one-name things. Today we're talking about a guy you've heard of definitely his band.
I like his band.
Robbie Robertson. Now, most listeners of this podcast, you're into music, so you know he was a founding member of the band. I always thought it was a little pretentious, the band. And Eric Clapton, by the way, years later thought the name Cream, which he was in, was kind of pretentious too, but because they were La Creme de la Creme. So I always thought the band, but I'll get to why they were named the band. The band was a 60s, 70s kind of folk rock outfit. He is one of 5 members, and with his death, only one guy remains, Garth Hudson, who was, ironically, the oldest member. I think Garth's in his late 80s now. And I was thinking that's like Bill Wyman outliving all the other Stones. Bill Wyman was in the Army in the 50s. That's how old he is. So, but he's still going. He's the oldest Stone, so maybe he'll outlive the rest of them. And Ringo, who's the oldest Beatle, will outlive McCartney. But I digress. So where to start? Robbie Robertson, unlikely rock hero, Jamie Royal Robertson, July 5th, 43 to August 9th, 2023. When I think of Robertson, I think of him mainly as a songwriter, creating such songs as The Wait, The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, Up on Cripple Creek, Stage Fright. I think the argument can be made, aside from their first 2 albums, which were great. The band produced great songs, but not necessarily strong albums. And that often happens when you have essentially one writer. I would argue the same thing with The Who and Pete Townsend. So what were his roots? He was born in the Six Nations of the Grand River Reserve, which is just southwest of Toronto. He was 14. He had summer jobs traveling in carnival circuits around Toronto. He worked at the CNE, but who didn't? I did. The first band he ever joined was called Little Caesar and the Consuls. What a great 50s name. In 57, he formed Robbie and the Rhythm Chords with his buddy Pete Traynor. Interesting trivia, I didn't know this until I was doing research for this podcast. Pete Traynor is the guy who founded Traynor amps, and I had one. They were great low-cost amps. Who knew? Pete Traynor. And then he began to shadow Rompin' Ronnie Hawkins. I'm not going to get into the Rompin' Ronnie Hawkins right now, but his influence can't be ignored. He was a life force, I'll give him that. Robertson was with a group called the Suedes, who opened for Hawkins, and Ronnie, who hired everybody, hired Robbie to be part of his road crew. Hawkins recorded 2 songs co-written by Robertson, but as listeners of this podcast know, we have had something to say about co-writers. Whenever I see a co-writing credit, like Elvis was a co-writer in a lot of songs, Celine Dion is a co-writer. Elvis Presley never wrote a song in his life, but his manager got him co-writing credits, and if you didn't give it to Elvis, you may not get on his album. So there was always this kind of strange battle with songwriters. Anyway, Robbie is co-writer on Ronnie Hawkins' songs. They hung out together, and eventually he began playing bass in Hawkins' band. A bit of trivia here. Again, I did not know this until I did this research, but Roy Buchanan, a few years older than Robertson, was briefly a member of the Hawks. who knew this? Roy Buchanan. And that was a big influence on Robbie Robertson's guitar style. That blew me away. Roy Buchanan is one of the guitar gods, and he's with Ronnie Hawkins. Yeah, a lot of people went through Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks.
You have an issue with Ronnie Hawkins because you called him a bottom feeder at one point in time. It's because he was apparently dating Beverly D'Angelo, and that bothered you.
I just find it bizarre that this guy can drag himself up from Arkansas, become a novelty act in Canada, because back then no one came from Arkansas. And he had this incredible career. In 1969, John Lennon and Yoko Ono hung out at his farm north of Toronto. Like, who is this guy?
But he was the guy back in the late 50s. Like, they brought him to Canada to help grow Canadian music.
He brought himself to Canada, and he had 2 or 3 hits. Mary Lou. He had a few hits, and that was it. Bo Diddley was a cover. So, maybe I'm being too hard on him. God bless him.
We should do a show on Ronnie Hawkins.
No, you'll be doing that solo, pal. Drummer and singer Levon Helm. A bit of trivia there. When Bernie Taupin wrote the lyrics, Levon, that's where he got it. That's where he got the name Levon. Anyway, Levon Helm was already a member of the Hawks and soon became close friends with Robertson. They toured, or as they say in Nova Scotia, toured the United States and Canada. They added Rick Danko, Richard Manuel, and Garth Hudson in 1961. So it goes back. Right? These are all good Canadian lads, except, of course, Levon. And that lineup toured with Ronnie throughout 62 and 63. What I wish to stress is how much experience these guys had. What great musicians they were. They did nothing but tour. At the beginning of 64, I guess they lost interest really in the rockabilly stuff that Ronnie was doing, and they left. And for a while, they were known as the Levon Helm Sextet. I think they had a sax player, and they changed their name to the Levon and the Hawks. So contrary to popular belief, Levon Helm was really the leader at this point. I know looking back on it, you always think Robertson was. Well, not then. They played a lot of stuff in New Jersey, a lot of bars rather in New York City. They worked on a John Hammond album, 1965, and Robertson was listed as Jamie R. Robertson in the credits. They released a few singles under the name The Canadian Squires. Again, I didn't know this. The band released The Canadian Squires in 1965. As Levon and the Hawks, they did something at Atco Records in 65. This is all great trivia. Atco Records. Okay, here we go. In August of 65, Robertson received a call from Albert Grossman. Grossman was Bob Dylan's manager, among other things. And he had been alerted to this Robbie Robertson by a woman named Mary Martin, one of Grossman's employees. She was from Toronto, and she knew the band, which wasn't the band yet. That's how these things kick in, as in life, everything is linked. Dylan met with Robertson, and Dylan wanted to hire Robertson, just Robertson. Robertson refused, to his credit. So Dylan took him to do 2 shows, one in New York and one in L.A., and Robertson suggested they use Levon on the drums, which they did. The shows were not well received because Dylan famously was heading toward electric, right? The band, including Dylan, flew to Toronto and rehearsed. And they did, I didn't know this, they did a rehearsal there at Dylan in 1965. Off went Dylan and the Hawks throughout the United States. The last quarter of 65, where folk rock was changing, and Dylan went electric for half the show. Now, mysteriously, Levon left the group in late November. It's like Ringo leaving the Beatles, which he actually did. But he walked out. Why? It's always been mysterious. Anyway, you can hear all this music, by the way, on something called Bootleg Series Volume 4, Bob Dylan Live, 1966, Royal Albert Hall. Arguably, this is when Dylan peaked as a songwriter, by the way. Blonde on Blonde came out in 66.
Don't forget the Basement Tapes.
Basement Tapes, yeah, you're right. I'm coming to them. They were, I remember when they were actually officially released. One of the first bootlegs.
Yeah, my dad jumped on that as soon as it came out.
Really,
Bob Dylan and the band, what is it called? Bob Dylan?
It's called, I think it's called the Basement Tapes.
Basement Tapes with Bob Dylan and the band.
Yeah. In 67, okay, this is myth. In 1966, in July, Bob Dylan had a motorcycle accident. Whether he did or not, he wanted to stop everything. My gut feeling is that he didn't. Not to the extent that he had to convalesce. He was probably had a minor breakdown, and he spent time with his new wife and kids in upstate New York. And the band was put on a retainer by Dylan's management. So in February '67, Dylan invited the Hawks to come to Woodstock, New York, to work on music, and they did. And yeah, that became the Basement Tapes. They recorded in the basement of a house called Big Pink. Big Pink because the house was pink. And those tapes were released years later. But the bootlegs, one of the first bootlegs, I can remember them, were the Basement Tapes. Dylan in '67 left to record the album John Wesley Harding, which is an interesting album. Robbie and Garth Hudson did some work on that album. Now, esteemed listeners, we're pushing Dylan to one side, and we're focusing on Robbie Robertson as a band leader / songwriter. And we have their first album, Music from Big Pink. And then you have on that album what is arguably his most famous song, The Weight. I always thought it was The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, but you look how many cover versions, it's mostly The Weight.
I like The Weight, and I like The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down. Up on Cripple Creek,
Yeah.
I'm okay with it. Ophelia, meh. Stage Fright. I know
See the Man with Stia.
Yeah, my dad likes that album.
Does he?
Yeah, he does. He likes Stage Fright album. But it just, the band, yeah, they're good. They serve a purpose. But some of the songs, I don't know. The Weight for me, that's like I could work out to that song. I could put the pedal to the right.
Yeah, really.
I love it. I love that song. You know.
Yeah, it's one of those amazing songs.
Crazy Old Chester followed me.
Oh, that one. He caught me in the fog. Yeah.
I said, you could take Jack, my dog. Hey, wait a minute, Chester. I'm a peaceful man. But it's a good song.
It's a great song,
and
man.
It's been redone, a couple
It doesn't
of times.
stop, right? It just does, I don't know, a billion times. That was on the first album. The second album is amazing, too. I think it's simply called The Band. So what's funny is that when the first album was released, the band initially avoided media attention and discouraged Capitol Records from promotional efforts. You got to love these guys, right? They were such a 60s ethos to them, and the whole anti-corporate stance. Now everyone is sniffing around for sponsorships. I know it's a different time now, but it really is a different time. In '69, they rented a home in the Hollywood Hills, and they recorded there. They did some live gigs. They played a concert at something called Woodstock in August of '69.
Never heard of it. Was it a big festival?
I think they did some records from there. I've never really known what this Woodstock thing is.
Yeah, we're going to look into it.
We have to do a show. And then they did the Isle of Wight Festival with Bob Dylan later. So that's pretty good. Anyway, it was a very busy time for the band. Their second album, as I said, was called The Band. Great album. The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, Up on Cripple Creek. They made, in 1970, in January, they made the cover of Time magazine. That cracks me up. The first time Time magazine ever had a rock band on its cover, and 4 of the 5 guys are Canadian. Third album was called Stage Fright. It was their highest charting album. Next album was called Cahoots. Didn't do that well, but it had a hit, Life is a Carnival. And they kept touring. Keep that in mind. That's the way they started. This was a touring band. A lot of bands aren't. That's, Dylan's a touring folk minstrel. A lot of guys have to tour or they just die. And that's what happened to them. 70-71 tour was called Rock of Ages. The live album. It's a great album. They played Watkins Glen. No one ever talks about the Watkins Glen Festival, but it was bigger in Woodstock in terms of attendance. 600,000 people. So in 74, they got back with Dylan again for a tour, and it was, everybody knows that tour, very successful. In 75, they recorded Northern Lights, Southern Cross. In my opinion, not a great album. And now we're into The Last Waltz area, 1976. I'm not going to talk too much about that concert and the Martin Scorsese film. It's so well known. It's all over YouTube. You can't get away from it. Basically, Robertson wanted to stop touring and end it in style. and this created the event, The Last Waltz, the final concert. Now, until about 10 minutes ago, I thought that was the last time Robertson ever played with the band.
That's right. So Robertson did a lot after ending his time in the band in 76. 5 solo albums, 20 odd film soundtracks, a memoir, a documentary about the band, and overseeing both the film and soundtrack for The Last Waltz.
But didn't you also say he also played with the band, the lineup, after The Last Waltz?
So the one thing he didn't want to do was play with them ever again.
Right.
And apparently they went with the band. Like you had said, the band last performed as a quintet on March 1st in 78 for a 3-song encore of Rick Danko's solo show at the Roxy in Los Angeles. So in 78 they played again, and then they went back in 83 without the singer and the guitarist, who was regarded as the group's leader.
So that sounds to me like he played at one gig with the band after Last Waltz.
Correct, in 78.
Gee, I didn't know that.
And then he said that they asked, he said, I just didn't want to. Why he didn't go back in 83? And his answer was, I just
go
didn't
over
want
and sulk in the corner or something.
Yeah. But there was also something that they said that in the memoirs of Levon Helm in 1993, apparently Levon didn't want him there.
Levon thought that Robbie took unfair songwriting credits. And I'm not going to get into that now because it kind of puts a bad taste on it. But it's not totally fabrication.
No, his words were, let's not invite him. Plain and simple.
Wow.
He just didn't want him there. Which is too bad, because when I look at the band, I hardly think of Danko or Manuel or Hudson.
Yeah.
I always think of Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson.
I know.
Right? I respect Levon Helm. I think he, being a drummer and a singer, that's pretty good. Don Henley was the second one I know that did that.
Yeah, that's
and
true.
Phil Collins. So
Yeah.
these guys did a career out of it. But without him, the band is it's finished. Like,
I don't know what happened with I know that Robertson visited Levon on his deathbed, and they kind of made up, but it was something to do with song royalties, and it's sad the way it worked out, because they were buddies. They were founding members before anybody else. So I don't know what happened, but if you look at the band, its sole writing credits are... Now and then Rich Emanuel wrote something, but basically it's Robbie Robertson, and that's where the money is, because where else would it be, right? Well, after the band breaks up, and Levon had a lot of money trouble in the 90s. So I want to talk a bit about Robertson's work outside the band. He did a lot. He worked with guys like Eric Clapton, Jesse Winchester. He was a busy guy, and Martin Scorsese and him were buds. Boy, he scored a lot of Scorsese films. Raging Bull, King of Comedy, The Color of Money. I didn't know he worked in The Color of Money.
wow, I don't know that neither. I didn't even know about Raging Bull.
I know, that's what I thought. Casino
That one threw me off.
and Gangs of New York.
God bless him.
Who knew? He did something called Killers of the Flower Moon shortly before his death. At the time of this podcast, that is yet to be released. And I think it sounds like he did 5 or 6 albums. The 6th, according to my list. First one was 87, Storyville 91, or Music for the Native American 98, Contact from the Underworld of Red Boy, 2011, How to Become Clairvoyant, I remember that one, and Somatic in 2019. So what to make of Robbie Robertson? The way I think of him, he was a musician's musician. Boy, did he pay his dues. It wasn't a talent show he won, right? America's Greatest. He was a strong songwriter, and he is inextricably linked to Bob Dylan. He is framed by classic rock that came out really from 68 to 72 or 3. That is his core legacy. Now, on top of that, he did some great work. Not necessarily commercial work, and that is actually to his credit. At his peak, he was an innovator in the sense that he applied modern sensibilities from the 1960s principally to a kind of 19th century rural, I'll call it like an agrarian feeling. It was tricky, but you have to remember, in the 60s, the farm and farmers were portrayed as offering greater honesty and integrity than the slick city dwellers. And that's why the band typically was dressed up and portrayed in a country mold. I mean, check out some of their album covers, right? Robertson, at his best, was a storyteller, kind of in the country sense, right? And he wrote great songs, as I said, and you owe it to yourself, really, to listen to the band's greatest hits.
Could I give you 10 songs that define Robbie Robertson?
Sure, go ahead.
The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down.
Okay.
The Weight.
Right.
It makes no difference.
Sure.
Ophelia.
Yeah.
The Shape I'm In.
Great song.
Up on Cripple Creek.
They Send Me.
Acadian Driftwood.
Acadian Driftwood.
Stage Fright.
Good song.
King Harvest.
Oh, a wonderful song.
And my favorite, Somewhere Down the Crazy River.
Oh, that's this solo
Somewhere
album.
down the crazy... I went down to Nick's Cafe.
Why do you always, the wind just kind of blew me this way?
That is so awesome. He's going to be missed for sure.
Thank you for bringing that up. Hope you enjoyed that short piece from Dr. Ian Clarke.
And I'm Kennedy, and good night.
Good night, goodbye, au revoir.